So now we've covered demand. Let's talk a little bit about supply. Quantity supplied is the amount of a good or service that producers will offer for sale at a given price. And the law of supply is opposite the law of demand. It states that the quantity supplied will increase with price. Let's take a look at a quick example here. We're going to stick in the cell phone market, and we'll look at the price of cell phones increases. The quantity of cell phones is also increasing, right? If the price is $20, then we're only going to be willing to sell 30 million cell phones. Whereas if the price goes up to $120, we're willing to sell 180 million cell phones. Can we graph this? Well, just like demand, yes, we can. So we start down here at a price of $20. We'll sell 30 million cell phones. We can plot that point right here. If we move on up the curve, right, at the price of 40, we will sell 60 million cell phones. Okay? We can plot all of those points and make a nice little graph of supply just like that. And just like demand, we're also going to have determinants of supply. The determinants of supply are technology, prices of inputs, expectations, and number of sellers. So we'll start off with technology. Everybody nowadays has a smartphone, but it wasn't always the case. I've gotten really into woodworking recently. And if I was into woodworking 20 years ago, before smartphones, and before YouTube and the rest of the internet was really taking off, I would have had to find somebody else to kind of teach me how to do a lot of the woodworking stuff that I've learned through YouTube videos, right? Nowadays, I can just pull a phone out of my pocket and look at a video while I'm trying to build something. That wasn't the case even 10 years ago. Another example of technology increasing supply. Here is a man working in the farm with a sickle harvesting wheat. And more recently, people have started to use these big machines called harvesters. Okay? They're both doing the same job, but the man in this machine can harvest a lot more wheat than this man with the sickle. So the technology, the harvester, is really increased the supply of wheat able to be produced by producers. Next determinant of supply is prices of inputs. Okay. Recently, the price of wood has skyrocketed. My parents do a lot of construction, and with construction, you need a lot of wood. So the price of an 8-foot 2x4 about 2.5 years ago, so back in 2017, was about $2.50. And nowadays, if you run to the hardware store here in 2020, if you're in the hardware store and you want an 8-foot 2x4, it's going to run you about $4. Okay, so the price of wood has become more expensive, and therefore the supply of new houses, new construction, other things that require 2x4s has decreased. Okay, if the price of an input goes up, supply is going to decrease. If the price of an input goes down, it's going to lead to an increase in supply. If it was cheaper to build houses, then we would build more houses. Okay. The next determinant of supply is expectations. So again, we'll go back to the iPhone market. Apple releases a new iPhone every fall. Apple knows this, and consumers now know this. Okay, so the stores that carry iPhones are actually going to increase their supply in anticipation of the new iPhone coming out. So they're going to want to get rid of all the old iPhones so they have room for the new one. So let's say, for example, that the iPhone 6 is out now and the iPhone 7 is coming out in 2 months. Well, you as a store are going to want to push out all of the iPhone 6s so you have room to shelve and store all of the iPhone 7s because they're going to sell at a higher margin when they come out. So you're going to increase your supply of iPhone 6s. Another part of expectations is in the bourbon market. For bourbon, it takes a minimum of 7 years to age to be considered bourbon. So they need to actually understand the market 7 years from now and predict what it's going to look like so they know how much bourbon they need to make. They need to barrel for 7 years so it can be released. So they have a whole nother level of expectations that they need to determine their supply. The last determinant of supply is number of sellers. Just like number of buyers, the number of sellers is going to determine supply. If we have one seller, if we have a monopoly, they have complete control over supply. We'll have a lower supply than if we have multiple sellers. So if we think of a flea market or a food court in the mall, there's a lot of different sellers all right there, and it's easy to compare prices, just like with the flea market. And supply is going to be shifted way out to the right. It'll be increased a lot just by sheer volume of sellers. You'll have a higher volume of supply. To recap, our determinants of supply or technology, prices of inputs, expectations, and number of sellers.